Time to talk recruiting between Florida State and Florida with Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I'm your host, Brian Smith. Today's episode is going to be all about recruiting. I've got Locked On Gators host Brandon Olson to come on, everybody's favorite. We're going to be sponsored today by LinkedIn Jobs. And Brandon, welcome to the show. You can't hear them, but they're boos. I can feel them. Just like it. By the way, yeah, I should probably do that. I should unmute you. Florida is in a very weird spot with recruiting. I was on your show recently. The last few weeks, it just seems like the same feeling, but it's like any other year. Florida and Florida State are going against each other for a lot of kids. And, a lot of stuff going on, Georgia, Florida, recruiting. Those two states get Florida State, the bulk of their players. I want, first off, just the floor is yours. Where is Florida in recruiting? And what's your comfort level with it? Because I have a hard time figuring out, and I've been studying recruiting over 30 years. So whatever you want to say, jump on in.
I am so incredibly uncomfortable. But I think that's just how it's going to be under Billy Napier for as long as that is. If that's this year or another 10 years, it just feels like there's kind of always going to be that slow burn where June, you're going to see a lot of visits and not a lot of action being made there. And then July, we tend to see things get cleaned up a little bit with more commits. Again, we saw that his first year. We saw that last year. And next month, I'll tell us if we're going to see that this year again. But it makes me uncomfortable to know that I'm going to sit through most, if not all of June without many commitments coming in. I mean, Florida this month has one commitment, and it was from a punter yesterday from Hayden Gray. Yeah, scholarship punter. It's what happens when, Florida has only one scholarship punter on the roster right now. So it makes sense to try to at least prioritize that a little bit for next year. But yeah, it's just an uncomfortable method of recruiting. I think it's pretty unorthodox. Consider, you look at Florida and it's like, yeah, they have 5 commits, and there's a bunch of other SEC programs that are at 15 and 14 right now. And it's a lot easier for a class to fall apart than it is for a class to come together in just a short span of time. But this seems to be Billy Napier's MO of, hey, we're going to have our visits in June and land our commitments in July. And as uncomfortable as it may make me or any other Florida Gators fan, that's just what we have to deal with.
Which player are you most likely to say is a good bet to end up with Florida who's currently not committed?
Nayshawn Montgomery is the guy that I'm looking at right now. I think he's the top name. I also know that Penn State may have not soured on him, but I've heard that they're focusing more on local recruits there.
Yeah, I've heard the same.
Yeah, so Nayshawn Montgomery for me is a guy. I know LSU is really making a push. They have an OV with him this weekend, but I still feel good about where Florida lands, considering how long they've been up in that battle.
All right. That's probably a pretty good pick. What about, there's a couple of kids that I know well that Florida has had ties with for different reasons, and Florida State as well. So I'm going to just put you on the spot with them. First is Vernell Brown. Obviously his dad, Gator, but no longer works there. Vernell no longer lives in Gainesville. He lives in Orlando, plays at Jones. What is your take on that situation? I think Florida State is the team to beat from what all I've heard. What is the Florida side of everything with Mr. Vernell?
From what I've heard behind the scenes, I think it's Florida State. But from what Vernell is saying publicly, he did an interview yesterday with On3, and he said, right now I put Florida at the top. We'll see how that changes with the Florida State visit next weekend. He's on campus in Gainesville this weekend. But I don't feel very comfortable about this. I am also someone who I don't really look at legacies as, they're going to be Florida. Like Florida has a big leg up, or any school has a big leg up over legacies, because especially with how kids are today, I feel like you might be at a disadvantage if they're a legacy, because so many kids are like, you know what? I want to go do my own thing away from my parents, where they have no influence, no discipline, no ties, whatever. And maybe that's it. I honestly don't know. But if I'm Florida, I'm just going to send Vernell Brown every single day a video of Ricky Pearsall when he got his name announced in the first round of the draft this year.
It's probably not a terrible way to do it, to be really honest with you. The other kid that I think is interesting, and I'm pretty sure I said this on either yesterday's show or the day before, Locked On Seminoles, Hilton Stubs plays at Mandarin High School in Jacksonville, one of the top safeties in the country, no doubt about it. Offers across the country. He is committed to the University of Southern California, but his brother is a walk-on at Florida State. So automatically you would think he's going to visit Florida and Miami, not Florida State. But that is what he's going to do. Have you heard anything on Stubs? What is Florida's gut on him? Because like Stubs told me that to my face, that it was going to be Florida and Miami, the two other visits. I don't know what happened there. That is very surprising to me, but I'm just reporting the news. What have you heard on him with the Gators?
He's a priority target for the Florida Gators. I know that they feel pretty good about what they're doing. And that's a big thing with the Florida Gators. I know that we always hear, oh, this school feels pretty good about what they're doing. This school feels pretty good about what they're doing. Florida very much just goes through their process. And I think when we hear Florida feels good about what they're doing, I don't know if it's necessarily Florida feels like they're going to land this kid as much as it is of Florida is happy with the process of how things are going with this recruit. And I know right now that's how they feel about Hilton Stubs. I mean, we had a conversation about this when Hilton Stubs committed to USC that just, I can't buy him sticking with this commitment. It's just really hard to stick through a commitment for a year across the country when the team you're committed to might have a little bit of a rough go of things with the Big Ten, when you can OV to any of the schools in the state of Florida like that. And you can't really do that with USC. You can't just wake up one day and go, oh yeah, this weekend I'm going to go to Los Angeles and go visit the Trojans. It's pretty difficult to do that. So I think it's just really hard to maintain that commitment. It's nothing against Stubs at all. It's a hard sell for me.
I kind of feel the same way. It is a very unique recruitment, but again, like his brother's at Florida State and he's not even going to visit. So I'm not going to venture any guesses there. It's pretty wild. As far as UF, is there anything so far in their recruiting? I mean, they're putting in effort, just for anybody that's curious. Anything with their recruiting class where you think they're going to beat out Florida State for anybody else? Anything there? Solomon Thomas, anybody else? Solomon
Thomas is the guy that I look at as, I think, the most likely flip candidate from Florida State. I know that Javian Hilson was on campus in Gainesville a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I forget which weekend it was. He said that he's going to be coming back to Gainesville for the Miami game on August 31st. And then this week he does an interview and he says, hey, it's Texas or Florida State. I have no idea what's going to happen there, because I know that Florida was looking for him. I've heard that Florida's I'm not saying this is the case with Javian Hilson or anybody that we've talked about or will talk about today. I've heard that Florida's removed some kids from their board completely for various character reasons, whatever that may be. But they've done it to quite a few players that I've heard of recently that I vehemently disagree with. And unless it's a very big character concern, I would still take the player. But it's a little odd there, but with Solomon Thomas, he's the guy that I look at as Florida's most likely flip candidate from Florida State. It's just, they're putting the full court press on him. I mean, how can you say no to two offensive line coaches? I don't get it there with Florida, but yeah, I think it's Solomon Thomas most likely.
That would probably be my guess as well. Florida State's class, like Florida's, is not huge yet, but they do cross paths quite a bit, and some of them that are committed to both schools. Where do you think UF stands with Bryce Fitzgerald? I'll bring up why I bring that up with relation to Florida State in a second.
I think they feel pretty decent about it. I think that they usually clean house on the official visit weekend. I think having him on campus for this weekend specifically is pretty telling. This is kind of a weekend where they tried to essentially unload the clip on recruiting, because this is one of their last weekend. This is their last weekend of the summer that they're running official visits, that they're welcoming official visitors. And this is kind of the time where it seems like they're trying to unload the clip. They bumped some kids. Florida was supposed to have 18 kids on campus this weekend. I know that they were the ones that were like, no, we're good on at least 3 of them, because they wanted to prioritize other kids that were on campus. So if you're going to be on campus in Gainesville this weekend, I consider you a top priority for this recruiting class. And especially at safety, they don't have any DBs yet for Florida for the 2025 class. Will Harris is trying to put the pressure on they have 3 safeties on campus this weekend for OBs.
Okay. Florida State is now involved with him. I don't know how long, but I always just thought he was going to go to Miami because he was a Miami target. He's from Columbus High School. That's the same high school as Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal. Kind of a priority for them, and it's like 15 minutes from the campus. But he's taking all kinds of trips. I have no idea where Bryce is going to go now. So Florida State's involved. Obviously, their DB coach is kind of good, and they're got a pretty good defensive back reputation right now. Probably one of the top 5 DB rooms in the country, if not the best. I'm curious to see where that one goes. Out of all the Florida State kids that I've heard about recently, that I've had somebody call me or whatever, that's the one that I have the least feel for is Bryce, because I didn't know that he was like a primary target. I just figured it was going to be UF or Miami, and we're done. So that's a kid I need to learn more about. Speaking of a kid I thought was going to go to Miami, and I don't know the whole deal with this. I've heard a couple of different stories. Cortez Mills. He's out of Homestead, big-time receiver. Is Florida going after him or no? This impacts Florida State in multiple ways. I'll explain that in a second.
To my knowledge, I don't think Florida feels like they're going to land him. I don't know if they think of him as a realistic possibility right now. I can't tell you how hard they've pushed for him. I can tell you that right now the feeling's not great about whether or not he's going to be a Gator, and they know that. So I don't know who soured first, if it was Cortez or Florida, but right now I'm really not getting my hopes up for Cortez Mills to be a Florida Gator at the end of the day.
I heard Miami was kind of waiting out on a couple other kids, which everybody wants. Dallas Wilson, who you and I talked about off air. We thought he was going to visit UF this weekend, if I remember correctly. And go ahead and tell the folks what's going on there. Fire away.
Yes. I don't know why, but Dallas Wilson has rescheduled his Florida visit to reportedly go to Miami this weekend. I don't even know how to explain it, man. Honestly, I don't get it at all.
A lot of these kids, and this is why I do my full previews, usually on Fridays and Saturdays, whether I'm writing an article, whether I'm doing Locked On Seminoles, whatever, the number of times that kids change is insane. It's ridiculous. So there's a lot to be said for let's figure this out and just kind of do it on Friday. But Dallas Wilson, for those who don't know, is arguably the best big receiver in the class of 25. He plays at Tech High School in Tampa. I've seen him numerous times. I used to live in Tampa. Really good football player. Miami, Florida State all want him. He's committed to Oregon, but that's a kid that's just an elite football player, and I think he could go just about anywhere, be really good. But I think Florida State's going to try to get him in towards the end of the year, if I've heard correctly. That could be changing by the moment now, too, because he's visiting Miami. Florida State's big weekend is not this one, the 14th, but it's the 21st. Maybe they're trying to switch around, maybe try to get him to come in next week. I don't know. But him not visiting Florida, not great for the Gators, I would guess. But, they have struggled big time with regards to finding guys that are big receivers at Florida here recently. Let's talk about a legacy kid. That's Ben Hanks. Obviously, his dad played for the Gators. Another South Florida kid. The reason I bring that up, Florida State is always, between Florida and Florida State, has always recruited South Florida way better and way harder. When Spurrier was there, they didn't recruit South Florida nearly as hard as Bowden did. I don't know the reason, they just didn't. What is the thought process there? Because he's going to be in Gainesville, etc. Do they have a legit shot, or is he just giving a passing glance because dad played there? I've heard different things. I think Florida's involved, but I'd rather have your opinion on it. And again, this is one of those deals where it can impact Florida State because they're crossing paths on all the DBs and receivers pretty much.
Yeah, from what I've been told, Ben Hanks is very realistic. Is a very realistic possibility for the Florida Gators. It's not just hey, my dad played there. His dad did go with him for the official visit with him last week. But this is a very realistic possibility that he winds up being a Florida Gator. I know that they went all out when he was there. They don't have a corner in this class committed. They didn't get a blue chip until Jameer Grimsley left after Alabama, after Nick Saban retired from Alabama in the 2024 class. They're looking specifically for blue chip defensive backs in this class, and they need the help. But they do feel pretty good about their approach with Ben Hanks Jr. And again, they did everything they can to let him know, hey, you're a priority with the Florida Gators right now.
He's supposed to visit Florida State next week. Obviously, having Sertan there, it makes it a little easier. But I thought that was a kid that would probably just go to Miami. He has not. He's from Booker T. Washington. That's right down the road from the University of Miami. But both Florida and Florida State have a shot. He's a kid that can play corner or free safety. He's really good. And there's also the thought about this. Florida State's pretty loaded at corner. I don't know if they're recruiting strictly at corner or say they need more safety. So I'm curious to see where he ends up going. Another kid that is really interesting that has ties to both Florida and Florida State, and I'm not sure if Florida State just didn't want him. He didn't want to follow his brother, but Sam Singleton's a running back for Florida State. His brother Caleb, correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably going to end up being a Gator. Yes, he's a corner out of Fleming Island. Is that still the case?
For now, yeah, that's still the expectation.
Okay, because with the Florida, I never know. I always got to ask every day because everything just changes.
Yeah, that's still the expectation to my knowledge. He is a higher priority player here. Defensive back coach Will Harris really likes him and really likes what he can do. They say that they're going to try him at corner, but he might also play safety. To me, that just yells that he's going to be a nickel at the end of the day.
Would be.
Yeah, and that's a very valuable position in football in 2024, 2025. So that's the expectation right now. Still feel pretty good about landing that one.
Okay, well, they've done a pretty good job of recruiting all over the state of Florida and getting guys on campus. But I'm just wondering when UF is going to get some of these kids to commit. And speaking of a commit, they did get an early one. I made this proclamation a couple of weeks ago on Locked On Seminoles. Out of all the kids in the state of Florida, if they lose, especially if they lose into Florida, that I would just do like an entire segment on how bad that would be and how awful that would be for Florida State staff. It's Jalen Wiggins. What have you heard? How solid is he, if at all, with Florida? He plays at Rickards High School in Tallahassee. I mean, he lives right down the street from FSU. What's the newest, if any, intel on him?
I will never feel comfortable with that commitment just because Tallahassee. I'll be completely honest.
I agree.
But I know that he's said he's really solid. I know he's been one of the primary recruiters for Florida as far as, high school kids going, oh, come play with us. I know Jalen Wiggins has been front and center on a lot of those conversations with other recruits trying to convince them to join the Florida Gators 2025 recruiting class. I know that they feel he's pretty solid. He's said he's pretty solid. And again, I will still not feel comfortable until he actually signs that dotted line and submits that letter of intent on signing day.
Well, he's got Florida in the rearview mirror. He's got Florida State coming up, and he already visited Stanford. Like, his list is kind of bizarre. Real smart kid, pretty quiet, but he's very good in the classroom. So that explains Stanford. Do you think this is a kid that is going to go all the way to National Signing Day, or is Florida at least, going to have some idea this summer? It hurts to lose 250-plus pound defensive lineman like Jalen, regardless. I get it. But, do they feel comfortable, at least for now, with keeping him? Or is the Florida State visit kind of like the doom and gloom because it's impending in just over a week?
I think right now they feel pretty good about what they've done. Just the way that Jalen Wiggins has spoken to them and the recruiting he's done for them. I think they feel pretty solid about where they stand with him. Of course, when games get played, things might change, but at least for the time being, I think they're not too worried about that official visit he has.
Well, that's surprising because, you think about the point you made earlier, I did too. He's from Tallahassee. There has to be.
We're on the same page. Trust, you and I are on the same page. I just think they're reading a different book.
Yeah, coaches often look at things much differently than the media. Speaking of D lineman, Myron Charles, is Florida still going after him? He's from Port Charlotte. He's a pure D tackle. Miami, Florida State, and Florida are the three that I, from speaking with him personally, that I got the vibe. But is UF still after him, or is it kind of like this sort of?
To my understanding, he's not exactly a priority right now. If that makes sense. Not that they're off of him, but not exactly a priority right now as far as who they're actually trying to land right now.
Okay, because he's a really good football player, but he's big body guys, and there just aren't a ton of them. And that always brings me to the point, well, if you're not getting him, who are you getting? And speaking of, is UF going to continue with a lot of 3-man looks, playing like a zero tech, or no?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing they love doing. I think that's one of the reasons that they're not prioritizing Myron Charles is that they have done that in recent classes. I mean, Mekhi Boyro is a player you and I were both big fans of for the 2024 class.
Sure.
He was there. Spring game, he was in one of the he was the second string nose tackle there for the spring game. So he's been impressing so far. Had an off-field incident, but as far as we're concerned, he's still a Florida Gator, not getting kicked off the team. Was a non-violent thing. But yeah, right now I think that Myron Charles isn't exactly a priority just because of what they have at nose tackle presently.
Okay. Speaking of Florida State battles, any more rumblings on Tramell Jones Jr., the quarterback committed to the Florida State Seminoles from Mandarin in Jacksonville?
I still think that if the Florida Gators get a quarterback for the 2025 class, Tramell Jones is the most likely one. I don't know how likely it is, but I think if they get a quarterback, he's fair. The most likely name. I'm expecting him to be on campus at some point during the season, probably for the Florida Gators. If it's me, I'm bringing him up there for the Miami game. That's just that would be incredible.
Oh, I get it. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, he's a kid's probably very interested. He's grown up in the area, so that probably means a lot to him. That's not really surprising. All right, let's switch over from recruiting now and just kind of finish up here, talk a little Florida and Florida State big box as programs. Obviously, Billy's on the hot seat. I'm not going to rehash that. That's not a news flash. But in your opinion, as a fan, as somebody that covers the team, what does he need to do to A, keep his job this year, and B, furthermore, give some, lack of a better phrase, confidence to the fan base and the administration in Gainesville that he can turn it around and right the ship?
I think that one of the main things he has to do, whether obviously win football games, outside of just win football games, I think one of the main things that he has to do is prove that he can run an organized ship right now. Because you look at especially the 2023 season, you have the Utah game. You had all offseason to prepare for that. You come out, you lay an egg with some of just, first off, the first play of Utah's offensive possession was a 70-yard touchdown because your safety took out your corner. So they were very unorganized there. You had the game still within your grasp very reasonably. And then when you forced them to punt in basically midfield territory, you had two players wearing the same number on punt return, leading to a penalty that then Utah kept the ball, and then Utah scored a touchdown, and that was the end of your hope there. You have
the door.
Yeah, you have the Kentucky game where Ray Davis just pulled a complete Marshawn Lynch, and it's just like people don't want to fight you when you just hit them in the face over and over and over and over and over, and that's all they did. They just kept spamming Ray Davis running at you. You have just so many times the Arkansas game, Florida lost to a 2-7 Arkansas team in Gainesville. Things like that can't happen. Like things like that just cannot happen. I think that's the biggest thing Billy Napier needs to show is outside of just winning games. Because if you're going to be a process-oriented head coach and run a process-oriented game, like Billy Napier has said for years that it's about the process more than anything else, your process can't be messy. That's just not reliable at all. And so for me, I think the biggest thing Billy Napier needs to do is show that he can run an organized program. Because to this point, it hasn't exactly been that, especially to the public eye. But I think on field, that's got to be the biggest thing. No more of just the mental lapses that should be happening in high school, not in the SEC.
To be honest, for me, it's pretty simple. Barring a quarterback injury, barring like 4 offensive linemen going down in the same game, something just random like that, Florida State's to the point where if they don't win at least 10 games in a regular season, because they have the things you just mentioned that Florida does, like they're organized. There's one thing Florida State is, it's organized. They should be a team, like worst case scenario is 9-3 if they have terrible luck. So what does Florida have to do to make it more organized? What is the snafu? Because like the 2 guys with the same jersey, by the way, that is Little League stuff. Like how does that happen, A? And do you have confidence that kind of stuff's going to get fixed? Because that's just bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know how it happens because for some reason they chose the defensive player to change his jersey. Right. It was Jason Marshall and Trey Wilson. They had Jason Marshall had to change his jersey number. I don't know why, considering Trey Wilson's already on the sideline. So just change the jersey,
So
go
they
in.
brought him off, changed, and then they both came. That is just
Yeah. And so for me, I'm saying, hey, Trey Wilson should have been the one to have to change jerseys. And then he goes on, and then in the TV break after the punt return, he goes back to his number 3. Makes no sense to me how it happens. I am very confident that things like that won't happen as much on special teams anymore. They brought in Joe Houston, who spent the 2023 and I believe 2022 seasons with the New England Patriots. Before that, he was running special teams for Iowa State when they had Steve Wordle, who was one of the very few college long snappers that actually goes on to the NFL. They also had Astley, their kicker, that also went to the NFL. They had a lot of NFL players on that special teams unit. And if you can go special teams for Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, yeah, I'm pretty confident in your ability to be able to coach special teams. So things like that 100% should not happen anymore now that Joe Houston's in charge.
Is there anything going into this? We're getting close to like SEC media days, ACC, all that stuff that gives you hope that Florida can be better than what it was last year. I'm not saying they're going to do what Florida State did last year and like win their league or whatever. What gives you the most hope Florida is going to be better than, and the rivalry game will mean more this year?
I think, honestly, one of the big things is having Ron Roberts come in to join your defensive staff. Ron Roberts is one of my favorite defensive minds in all of football right now. He was one of the recent revolutionaries. I mean, you go back to his days at Delta State, you look at what Dave Aranda has done throughout his career. Big part of that is because of Ron Roberts. He was also at Louisiana with Billy Napier when they were winning the Sun Belt. And then also you go back to what they did with Graham Mertz now, year 2. I'm not saying Graham Mertz is an amazing quarterback at all. But when you have 2 years with your quarterback, that's a major advantage that you have there, especially when Florida has quite a few teams on the schedule this year that do not have a returning quarterback.
That's pretty wild because it's amazing how college coaches change and you just don't know where they're going. You don't know who's going to call who, what kind of money is going to be there. It is so wild trying to keep track of college coaches, but it is what it is. Brandon, thank you very much for coming on and talking about the Gators and like they're rivals with Florida State on the field, but in recruiting, they're crossing paths. And I'm curious if the Florida State-Florida game will have the same 2 head coaches by the time it's played in late November, because one of them may not be there the way I'm looking at it. But
yeah, Mike Norvell's on the hot seat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sure is. Anyway, thank you very much, Brandon. You do a great job on Locked On Gators. Everybody have a great day, and thank you very much.